Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be totaling up for Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Beware the Snowman. This one was another pleasant surprise. The story doesn't hold back on the evil, scar-faced snowman, and it has some fun little twists in it that I didn't see coming. I thought the Arctic Circle as a setting was a nice change of pace, and Jacqueline is a pretty likable protagonist with an actual personality. If you skipped this one like I did as a kid, you should check it out. This 1997 cover is simple but effective. Despite never reading this book, I could easily remember this cover. The snowman looks about as mean as you can realistically make a snowman look. I think the only way it could have been better was maybe the inclusion of the ice cave from the story, since it plays a central part and was decently creepy. The 2006 slime border brightens the image and goes with a light blue border, which isn't terrible, it just makes the whole thing a little too one note for me. I would have liked to see a fresh take on the snowman, but this one never got a reprint. There wasn't any snowman related merchandise, which seems like a missed opportunity since how many Winter Goosebumps books do we really get? It just has the usual trading card book tear out this week. Our front take says, "He's got a heart of cold," which is a play on "He's got a heart of gold." Our back take says, "No melting allowed." But let's check out the blurb on the back. Jacqueline used to live with her Aunt Greta in Chicago, but not anymore. They moved to a place called Sharpia, a tiny village on the edge of the Arctic Circle. Jacqueline can't believe she's stuck in Nowheresville. No movie theaters, no malls, no nothing. Plus, there's something really odd about this village. At night, there's strange howling noises, and in front of every house, there's a snowman. A creepy snowman with a red scarf, a deep scar on his face, and a really evil smile. But let's jump into this summary. The book opens with our introduction to Jacqueline, who's busy whispering creepy poems to herself. "When the snow blows wild and the day grows old, beware the snowman, my child. Beware the snowman. He brings the cold." Apparently, Jacqueline's dead mom used to sing this poem to her when she was like 5, and it just popped into her head while exploring her new house. Jacqueline lives with her Aunt Greta now, and they just moved to bumfuck nowhere. Like, they are literally at the edge of the Arctic Circle in a village called Sharpia. Jacqueline knows there's a second verse to this poem, but she can't seem to remember it, which means of course this will be pivotal to the plot later on, I'm guessing. We learn that in addition to having a dead mother, Jacqueline never knew her father because he took off right after she was born. I kinda want the father to be the snowman from the cover of the book as a plot twist later. I also really want to know why they moved to the Arctic Circle, and apparently so does Jacqueline, but all Aunt Greta will say it was time for a change and time to move on. Going from Chicago to a village in the Arctic Circle is a pretty damn big change. I'd be fairly resentful if I was Jacqueline. Right before entering their new home, Jacqueline spots a snowman across the street with a bright red scarf and a scar on its face. She squints to get a better look, and just then the snowman starts to move in a chapter cliffhanger. But actually, it's just the wind fluttering the scarf around. The snowman is basically just your classic snowman, with stick arms, pebbles for a mouth, a carrot nose, and 2 eyes made out of stone. The only things that stand out about it are that it's a little mean looking, and the scar on its face, which I'm impressed Jacqueline can see from across the street. She gets back to unpacking and learns their new house only has 1 bedroom for Aunt Greta, so Jacqueline will be sleeping in the attic. Jacqueline is already homesick and misses her friends and the mall. She also wonders if the kids at school even speak English. Aunt Greta suggests that Jacqueline goes to explore the village, so she does. There's not much to see, just a school, general store, church, post office, but Jacqueline is trying her best to remain positive and thinks the views of the mountain are at least pretty. Just as she's deluding herself into thinking this village isn't so bad, we have a chapter cliffhanger where an icy hand grabs her on the neck from behind. This ends up just being a brother and sister duo named Rolanda and Eli. Rolanda apologizes for her brother's behavior, but Eli says getting scared is the only thing to do in this village. Rolanda and Eli are now building a snowman, and surprise, it looks just like the creepy one Jacqueline saw earlier. She wants to know why they're making it that way, but both kids nervously change the subject, and Jacqueline is a terrible investigator because she just lets them ignore her question. Jacqueline then suggests they walk up towards the mountain because she hasn't got to check it out yet, and is taken aback when both kids freak out and shout at her how she can't do that. Jacqueline demands to know why, and the 2 kids can't think of a good reason and just say it's tradition for the villagers to not go up there. When Jacqueline remains unconvinced by this logic, Eli says it's too cold to go up there, and a human would freeze to ice in 30 seconds. Jacqueline is like, "Sure, Jan," and decides just to drop the subject. I kinda hope that an evil killer snowman lives up there in a lair like the Grinch or something. Jacqueline has had enough of these 2 weirdo kids and decides to continue exploring the village. She promises the kids she won't go all the way up the mountain, but just wants to walk up a little further. She ends up walking up a wooded trail and gets distracted by large footprints that she can't identify. When she looks up, she's face to face with another creepy snowman. She then turns around and spots another one in the woods. She tells herself this just must be some sort of weird village decoration, but doesn't understand why Eli and Rolanda won't explain them. Jacqueline realizes she's getting pretty far up this mountain and wonders if she'd head back down, but she does the more exciting thing and decides to ignore the kids' warnings and ventures up the mountain. She walks pretty far and soon she stops seeing houses. She keeps walking and then comes across a secluded wooden cabin. For some reason, Jacqueline thinks this cabin might be abandoned, even though it sounds just like every other tiny house we've seen in this story so far. Jacqueline lets herself right in the front door, and in a chapter cliffhanger, she's knocked to the ground by a snarling white beast. This actually ends up being a wolf, but don't worry, it's been domesticated by the old mountain man whose cabin Jacqueline just broke into. She seems very confused on why this old man is upset, but it's like, girl, you just waltzed into this man's house. The old man calls off Wolfgang, and Jacqueline's able to stand back up. Wolfgang is not the most creative name for a wolf, like might as well just call him Wolfie. The old man angrily demands to know who she is, but Jacqueline thinks she's had enough of the situation and races out of the cabin and up the mountain. To her horror, he follows after her while shouting, "Beware the snowman." This stops her because hearing those words makes her think of the poem she was mumbling earlier. The old man then shouts how the snowman lives in an ice cave, and if he runs into him, she'll never return. Jacqueline decides this old man must just be nuts and races down the mountain. She thinks she's had gotten away, but to her surprise, she turns around and finds the wolf in hot pursuit. She stumbles into the road and the wolf stops chasing her. She concludes it must just be making sure she doesn't go back up the mountain. Once back in the village, it's now dark, so Jacqueline decides to start running because she thinks her aunt is probably pretty worried about her. While running in the dark, ugly snowmen keep popping out at her, and she officially decides she hates this weird-ass village. Right before getting home, she hears heavy footsteps behind her, and she thinks the old man from the mountain must be following her, but it ends up just being Rolanda. Jacqueline tells her about her little mountain adventure, and Rolanda's like, "Oh, you ran into Conrad. He works for the snowman," and then doesn't say anything more. Jacqueline and Aunt Greta need to get out of this village. It's giving cult vibes. Jacqueline demands to know what Rolanda knows about this snowman, and she finally agrees to tell her all about it tomorrow night outside the church. Jacqueline returns home and asks Aunt Greta if she knows anything about a snowman, which causes her to gasp, and then to pretend she has no idea what Jacqueline is talking about. Jacqueline then says the poem to her. "When the snow blows wild and the day grows old, beware the snowman, my child, beware the snowman, he brings the cold." This causes Aunt Greta to go pale and tremble, but again she insists she has no idea what Jacqueline is talking about. Aunt Greta is clearly in this snowman cult and angrily changes the subject. That night, Jacqueline can't fall asleep because she's feeling claustrophobic in her new attic bedroom. She hears wolf howls and crawls downstairs to get a better look out the window, but just sees the village in darkness because everyone is asleep. Jacqueline then does something I would never do and decides to take a little midnight walk in the unfamiliar village after hearing wolf howls outside. Jacqueline is an interesting protagonist in the sense that she's optimistic and kind of fearless. Like, she just keeps plowing full speed ahead when I would be like, fuck that, I'm going home. Once outside, she finds the snowy, silent village beautiful in a creepy way and is energized by the idea of being the only one awake in like a 100-mile radius. She is then snapped back to reality when she hears another howl, but now isn't so sure it's a wolf after all because it sounds kinda human. While standing there contemplating this, a shadow suddenly appears behind her. This just ends up being another snowman. For something that is stationary, Jacqueline sure gets startled by these things often. She sees a few more ugly snowmen when she hears another creepy howl and thinks it's much closer, and is now certain it's vaguely human. A human howl in the dark is somehow so much creepier than a wolf one. This inspires her to run back home, but along the way she has yet another snowman scare where she thinks it's nodding at her, but really the wind just knocks the head onto the ground. As she's racing home, the howls continue with each one sounding closer than the last, yet when she looks behind her she sees nothing. She reaches her front door, only to hear a howl incredibly close by, and then realizes she's locked herself out. She notices the front window has been left open a crack, so she seizes the opportunity and slides it open, and as she's doing this she hears another howl on the other side of the house. She's able to dive in and slam the window shut behind her, and then hears nothing. You know, Aunt Greta must not care about her heating bill to be leaving a window open in the Arctic Circle. Jacqueline is relieved to be inside and is also happy she managed to sneak in without being detected because Aunt Greta is still asleep. Jacqueline is clearly a night owl because this girl still has energy and decides to search boxes for her old poetry notebook in hopes of finding the second verse to the snowman poem. While tearing through the boxes like a wild animal, she is startled when she hears somebody else in the room with her. It's supposed to be a chapter cliffhanger, but it's clearly Aunt Greta wondering why the hell Jacqueline is running around open boxes in the middle of the night. Aunt Greta realizes Jacqueline was just outside and chastises her for doing something so stupid and dangerous and sends her to bed. Right before falling asleep, Jacqueline hears whispered words, "Beware the snowman, Jacqueline. Beware the snowman." This girl is having a long night. These words cause Jacqueline to pop up wide awake and she shouts, "Who are you?" and only hears, "Beware the snowman" in response. She again asked, "Who said that?" and then hears nothing, so she's left just sitting there wide awake wondering what the fuck is happening. Eventually she drifts off to sleep, which is impressive considering she's dealt with mystery snowmen, wolves, snow hermits, and now potentially a ghost. I don't think I'd be able just to drift off to sleep at this point. The next morning, her Aunt Greta convinces her it's probably just a dream, and Jacqueline moves on to thinking about her meetup with Rolanda. After dinner, it's basically a blizzard out, but Aunt Greta lets Jacqueline meet up with Rolanda at the church anyways, as long as she promises to be home by 9. While heading to the church, Jacqueline can barely see and ends up crashing face first into something with evil black eyes and a chapter cliffhanger. But at this point, it really shouldn't be much of a cliffhanger because every other chapter involves this girl running into a snowman, and this chapter is no exception. Rolanda appears and is like, "Are you okay? I just watched you crash into that snowman," and Jacqueline assures her she's fine. They enter the church so Rolanda can finally explain this snowman situation properly, and it involves not one, but two sorcerers, so brace yourself. Years ago, a man and a woman sorcerer were fooling around with magic and accidentally brought a snowman back to life. The snowman was powerful and evil, and eventually decided it wanted to destroy the village. The sorcerers were unable to put the snowman back to sleep and skip town, so the villagers were forced to enact mob justice and chase the snowman up the mountain and into the ice cave where it lives today. At night, they can hear it howling angrily, and they build little snowman in its honor, so if it ever comes back down, it can see that they all respect it. Old man Conrad built his cabin close to the ice cave, and no one knows why. They think maybe he works for the snowman, or is trying to keep the village safe, but he doesn't talk to anyone, so there's no way to tell if he's good or evil. After hearing this chapter of snowman folklore, Jacqueline bursts out laughing and thinks it just has to be a big old joke that the villagers play on the new residents. Jacqueline walks Rolanda back to her house, and while walking home, she hears heavy thudding behind her and chapter cliffhanger. This ends up just being Eli, and he wants Jacqueline to know that the snowman stories are true, because he saw the snowman and the snowman saw him. A couple weeks ago, he and his friends snuck up to the ice cave and saw a snowman as big as a grizzly bear walking around, and ever since then he's been plagued by nightmares of snowmen. Jacqueline still isn't sure if she believes these kids and races home to make it back before 9 o'clock. Once home, she freaks out when Aunt Greta is nowhere to be found, and she finds a large puddle on the floor in her bedroom. Aunt Greta then appears at the front door because she was just having dessert with some neighbors that she met at the general store. She wants to know why Jacqueline looks so scared, and she blurts out she found a puddle in the bedroom and thought the snowman got her. Aunt Greta tries to reassure that this is all just superstition, but makes Jacqueline promise that she won't visit the ice cave just to be safe. But then a couple paragraphs later, Jacqueline tells herself she's going to that ice cave tomorrow to see if all this snowman shit is true. That night, Jacqueline has a weird-ass dream about white kittens with red scarves crawling all over each other in a pile while screeching and hissing. Clearly, this snowman is starting to get to her if it's even rooting kittens. The next afternoon, she finds Eli and Rolanda building a snowman in her yard because they're convinced she won't be safe until she has a snowman of her own. She's able to convince the two kids to distract Conrad while she sneaks up to the ice cave. They really don't want to, but Jacqueline lets them know she's going whether they help or not, so if they want her to be safe, they'll help. At Conrad's cabin, Eli and Rolanda distract Conrad and the wolf, which gives Jacqueline plenty of time to race up the mountain, although she's wondering if she should have waited until the next day, because it's already getting kinda dark. When she reaches the back of the ice cave, she's forced to scoot along the mountain edge in order to reach the cave entrance. As she's carefully scooting, a loud rumble from the cave causes the entire mountainside to shake, but Jacqueline is committed and continues forward. She reaches the front of the cave, which is a massive black hole with dozens of enormous icicles hanging down at the entrance. Another rumble from the cave drops Jacqueline to her knees, and then she spots an enormous snowman shuffling out from the darkness. Jacqueline is so startled that she forgets she's on a cliff and stumbles backwards right off the ledge in a literal chapter cliffhanger. She's able to pull herself back up, but there's still an enormous snowman to deal with. It lumbers towards her, and the air is so cold that she can see it radiating off the snowman. It then demands to know who she is, and she tells him, Jacqueline DeForest. And then, holy shit, I was just joking, but I was right. The snowman then responds, I am your father. I don't know if the intended response was to laugh, but this part made me laugh out loud, especially since Jacqueline then wails, no! On the very next page, like this is Star Wars. The snowman then informs Jacqueline that her mother was a sorceress, and so is her Aunt Greta. Jacqueline is like, bullshit, I've never seen Aunt Greta use magic, but Daddy Snowman insists that they put a spell on him that lasts 10 years, so Aunt Greta had to return to renew the spell. This is all nonsense, but I'm loving it anyways. Daddy Snowman then says Jacqueline can reverse the spell, and it becomes obvious to her that she just has to say the second verse of the Snowman poem, but is unsure if she should help this supposed snowman father, and she still doesn't remember the poem anyways. Jacqueline decides yes, she's gonna help, but when she goes to leave the mountain to retrieve the poem, she runs right into Aunt Greta, who does not look very happy. Her eyes are wild and she looks ready for a fight. Aunt Greta has the poetry book, but is like, this man is not your father. It's a horrible monster your mother and I trapped inside a snowman before fleeing the village. At this point, Jacqueline doesn't know who to believe, Daddy Snowman or the old lady who raised her, but she has an idea. She decides she's just gonna read the second verse and see what happens. She snatches the poetry book, but Aunt Greta tears out the necessary page and tosses it off the cliff. But then we get a little plot convenience, and the wind just so happens to blow the page right back up the cliff and into Jacqueline's hands. She immediately shouts the first 3 lines of the second verse, but Aunt Greta snatches the page back and rips it to shreds because we have pages to fill. Fear not though, because suddenly Jacqueline can remember the rest of the poem. When the snows melt and the warm sun is with thee, beware the snowman, for the snowman shall go free. The snowman begins to immediately melt, and it all seems like a happy ending, but not so fast. Jacqueline starts screaming in terror in a chapter cliffhanger. Maybe because her father was standing there bug-ass naked and that's just not what she expected to see? But no, he's not naked. He's actually a monster. A monster, an ugly, snarling, red-skinned monster, stomped out from under the oozing snow. Aunt Greta had told the truth. A monster was trapped inside the snowman, not my father. A monster, such a hideous monster. Its head and body were covered in crusty red scales. Its yellow eyes rolled wildly in its bowl-shaped head. A purple tongue flapped from its jagged-toothed mouth. The monster chucks the poetry book off the side of the mountain and declares Jacqueline and Aunt Greta are next. He scoops them up and dangles them off the cliffside, but before he can drop them, he's startled by an army of snowmen from the village marching towards him. The monster drops Jacqueline and Aunt Greta back to the ground and they scamper over to the cave wall. This book is wild. I thought the snowmen were there to rescue Aunt Greta and Jacqueline, but then Aunt Greta says they're there to serve the monster. Aunt Greta is wrong though, and the snowmen all begin to jump on the monster, smothering him. Eventually, the monster is frozen solid against the mountainside. Conrad appears and is like, I made the snowman march because I am also a sorcerer, and I am also your father. Apparently, Aunt Greta moved Jacqueline back to the village in hopes of finding her father again because he had to stay behind to protect the village. Everyone is having a happy little ending with the family reunited when Jacqueline notices all of the remaining snowmen just staring at them. One approaches them aggressively and says, "Can we go back down now? It's really cold up here." And that's how this one ends, with a little joke fake out. I suppose there can really only be so many twists with an ending like this. Beware the Snowman did not get an episode, but it would have been amazing if it had. The next 3 books don't have episodes, so I figured this is a good time to start the 3-part Chillogy, starting with part 1's Squeal of Fortune. And I have no idea what to expect with these, so let's just get to the episode. This is very Beetlejuice.
Carlsville is open. Time to play.
This is peak mid-90s cool.
Boys and girls, this is GB Radio 320. It's going to be a hot one today. It's going to climb way up there.
So I guess Jessica's big thing is she's cheap or greedy. I don't know. She just ripped these 2 boys off at a yard sale.
Fine. $2.
The only other bill I have is, well, it's just a 1.
Well, given the music cue, I'm thinking she's greedy.
I want money. I need lots of money.
So now she's sweeping the attic to get money, and she finds Beetlejuice.
Cool.
This guy looks like an Instagram model with that greasy plastic look.
Hello?
Mom, it's Jessica. Can you come up here?
I always think miniature towns like this are cool. Eventually, I want to collect a Christmas one, like the little old lady I am at heart.
Left it here.
Probably the previous owners.
Can I have it?
Sure.
Jessica has a cell phone in 1997. She's living the life.
Jessica Walter speaking.
Jessica just got Jumanji'd into this game. It's Carl, the Insta-thought from earlier.
Hello? Who is this?
Carl. But my friends call me Carl.
Carl wants Jessica to sell lemonade, and her greedy ass is down for it.
Gonna love it. Selling lemonade.
This child looks like Elvis in elf form.
You listen to her. Do whatever she says.
Well, it's pretty clear what Jessica's gonna do.
Don't raise prices. I wouldn't want to be accused of unfair business.
Carl is like God and controls the weather.
Time to turn up the heat.
This whole town is Uncanny Valley, and I love it.
Well, thank you. Well, that is the best lemonade I've ever had.
Good day, girls. A little something to wet the whistle, if I might. Good day, Gilman. It's a scorcher, isn't it? Give me a lemonade.
Uh-oh, we've already doubled the price.
$2 doesn't seem like enough for such a delightful lemon beverage.
Jessica is now watering down the product. She really is a little businesswoman.
Now what are you doing? I'm increasing our inventory.
This town is full of NPCs.
Look at these people. What happened to them?
We're about to get a lemonade riot.
All out of lemonade. There's only 1 glass left.
Time for a bidding war.
And I will be happy to sell it to the highest bidder. What do you...
Carl has that pleather millennium style. The crowd has turned.
Nothing but a greedy little pig.
Well, I can't say I saw this coming.
Carl, you're nothing but a greedy little pig.
Everyone loves bacon.
Carl loves bacon. Carl!
I'm really curious to see how this works into a trilogy.
What's happening to me?
Greedy little pig.
It's probably not easy to dial with hooves.
911.
This episode is weird as hell. Well, that was kind of anticlimactic.
Hello?
Oh, I see how they're gonna make this a trilogy.
You can't just throw it away. Watch me.
Overall, I thought Beware the Snowman was a fun book, and it went places I didn't expect it to. I thought having the snowman actually be a monster and not her father was a fun twist, because I fully expected Aunt Greta to be evil. There were points it was a little repetitive, with Jacqueline being startled by literally every snowman she encountered, but I thought the setting was effectively creepy, especially when she's wandering around that town at night. I think if I had read this one as a kid, I would have really enjoyed it. I'm gonna give this one 4 out of 5 Frosties. I really liked that there was an actual giant snowman living in an ice cave. Okay, on to our totals. Beware the Snowman didn't have any vomit, asshole victims, shoulder scares, or it was only dreams, but it did have some 90s moments. In Getting Jiggy with the 90s, we had 2 90s moments. These included Chicago Bulls' madness of the 90s, and Jacqueline's love for shopping malls. This raises our Goosebumps total to 157 jiggy 90s moments. Beware the Snowman had 1 prank moment. That was when Eli decided to scare Jacqueline when he first met her with an icy hand to the neck. This raises our total to 117 pranks. Beware the Snowman had the typical amount of chapter cliffhangers, with a total of 15 cliffhangers. This raises our Goosebumps series total to 630. Our clunky cliffhanger award has to go to chapters 12 to 13, where she thinks a stranger's in the house when it's clearly Aunt Greta, wondering why Jacqueline is roaming around at 1 a.m. Shocker ending. The final few chapters are full of twists in this book, but our final page twist of the army of snowmen not being evil and just being cold doesn't really feel like much of a shocker ending and more of a joke, so I'm not counting it this week. This leaves our Goosebumps series total at 44. Well, that's it for Beware the Snowman. I thought this book was a pleasant surprise, and I didn't expect there to be actual monsters in it. Next week is How I Learned to Fly, which I never read, but understand is a departure from our typical Goosebumps style, so we'll see how that goes. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Beware the Snowman. Did you think the snowman was her father? Are you a winter person? How is listening to a snow story in August? It's currently 103 degrees as I record this, and I'm miserable. Also, what did you think of my snowman horror clips this week? I really don't care for the Jack Frost movies, but my options were limited. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
The pride. The love.